Hey everyone. I'd like you to imagine a world where challenging behaviours like aggression, substance use and isolation are seen not as problems to be fixed, but as symptoms of a deeper underlying cause. What if the confronting and confusing behaviour that we see sometimes in ourselves and others are actually survival mechanisms developed in response to a challenging environment? Really on a global level, we've long tried to improve community and population wellbeing by addressing the causes of poor wellbeing, so things like chronic diseases and mental illnesses. But what if these causes are actually responses to something deeper? So I invite you today to view those responses through a different lens, so one of trauma, neurodiversity and shame. These factors shape how we behave, react and relate to ourselves and others. And if we use them, view behaviour through this lens, it offers new possibilities for compassion, for understanding, to reduce conflict, to increase co-regulation and critically to improve connection. This has the potential to reshape families, workplaces and communities. But first, how do trauma, neurodiversity and shame shape us? We'll start with trauma. So trauma can be thought of as an event or a series of events that changes the lens through which we see the world. And we learn that the world is no longer safe. In the case of early childhood trauma, sometimes that belief of being safe is not able to develop in the first place. And there's been a fair bit of research on adverse childhood experiences for decades. There are 10 adverse childhood experiences that are commonly looked at in the research. We know there's lots more in real life, realistically. And they're broadly grouped under abuse, neglect and household dysfunction. And these adverse childhood experiences are linked in a dose-response relationship to a host of health and emotional harms across the lifespan. And experiencing 4 or more adverse childhood experiences up until you turn 18 years of age is related to an increased likelihood of experiencing the harms that you see on your screen. And this is really serious, really serious. Really serious more so because trauma and childhood trauma is common. 62% of Australians, and this is a general population sample, not a prison sample, not an out-of-home care participants, a general population sample, 62% have experienced one or more types of maltreatment in childhood. A quarter of Australians, a quarter of our population are estimated to have experienced 3 to 5 types of maltreatment in childhood. 3 to 5 types. That is in the range where the risk of experiencing these harms spike. We have a public health crisis on our hands. So how does this happen? How are experiences in childhood linked to harms across the lifespan? So if our early environment is harsh or challenging, there are biological processes that prime us to live and flourish, or to live and flourish and pass on our genes in that harsh environment. For example, nervous system changes take place. People who experience trauma can become hypervigilant to threats or stresses in their environment, constantly scanning as if they're on high alert, expecting something to happen. We can be easily overwhelmed when we experience stresses, and we can be knocked out of our window of tolerance more easily. So if you think of a window of tolerance like your baseline level of arousal, of physiological arousal, where you can think, you can plan, you can consider consequences. And critically, when you think of kids at school, you can connect, play and learn. And when we are knocked out of, so people who experience trauma, their windows of tolerance can be smaller, knocked out of that level of arousal more easily. And when we're knocked out of our window of tolerance, we engage in coping strategies to help us regulate our dysregulated emotions. And these either help to calm us, to calm our system back to where it feels good and we can work, or they help us to control our environment. Now, these strategies are protective in that moment. They are survival mechanisms designed to keep us safe, but they can become unhelpful over time, especially if our environment changes over our life. From the outside, these coping behaviours can be seen as confronting. They might be seen as confusing. They might be seen as dysfunctional, but they are biologically based responses designed to keep us safe. They are protective responses that are shaped by our early environment. So what happens when we engage in these biologically informed natural responses? A lot of the time, we experience judgment and shame. So shame is a painful and a powerful emotion. We've all felt it. It's universal. And we experience it as early as 16 months of age. So we experience shame when we feel that we've been harshly judged. We've been judged as bad by others. We experience it early, 16 months of age, and it's thought to have an evolutionary response. We need to know if we're at risk of being cast out of our social group for safety, right? Shame differs from guilt. So guilt, we experience guilt when we feel that our actions or our behaviour have been judged poorly. But we experience shame when the core of us, our identity, has been judged as bad or lacking or deficient, not good enough, unworthy. And shame, chronic shame, can be really, really damaging for that reason. Shame it's a common emotion, but it's a private emotion. Shame happens in the dark, but it's strong. It pushes us into that fight or flight mode, and we engage in coping strategies to help us bring our emotions back to baseline and also to sort of prevent us feeling shame the next time. The Compass of Shame model is a really helpful framework to help us understand some of these shame coping behaviours. So up the top there, we've got withdrawal. So these are shame coping strategies that help us deal with the shame sort of by escaping it. So we numb ourselves out. We might engage in chronic gaming. We might engage in substance use. We might engage in doom scrolling under the doona on our phones. We might physically remove ourselves from the situation, or it might present as not getting back to text messages, not responding to emails, not listening to voicemails. We try and protect ourselves from that pain that shame gives us. The next coping strategy is attack other, and this is the constellation of sort of violence, aggression, blaming, lashing out. And James Gilligan, who's a prominent American psychiatrist, proposed that shame is the root cause of all aggression. The next coping strategy is attack self, and this is where people try to deal with the shame by kind of giving into it, leaning into it, accepting it as real. And that's where we get self-harming behaviours, a lot of self-talk, putting ourselves down, or blaming the self. And then this coping strategy is one that I use sometimes, quite a bit. Those compensatory mechanisms. We try to prove the shame wrong, and we try to tie up our identity in being perfect or being great at our job, great at our work, anything to prove the shame wrong. Now, this is a really helpful model when applied to work, colleagues, at home. If you've got patients that aren't turning up to services, who don't want to seek help, who aren't engaging in treatment, who don't want to come and see you even though they need help, they can't open their bills when it comes to financial harms. This is a really helpful model to help to explain the behaviour. And if you look at behaviour through this lens, it might give you some clues about what you can do. You can adapt your behaviour. You can adapt your language. You can be more inclusive, more welcoming, to create that compassionate understanding and connection. All right, so the next thing that influences how we react, behave and relate is neurodiversity. Now, I'm presenting this as someone who's neurodiverse. I have ADHD, which was a surprise to absolutely no one when I was diagnosed. And when we're It means it gives me strengths in some areas. Like if you're looking for car keys in the produce section of Aldi, I'm your gal. I had a search team assembled in about 30 seconds. I mean, they were my car keys. I found them in the broccoli. You've got to watch that broccoli. But I also have challenges in areas that other people, find really easy, like getting my kids to school is a proper nightmare. So neurodiversity, we can think of it as population level differences in brain structure and function, and it challenges the idea that there's a normal way to think or to process information. Although I'll argue that much of society is built on that assumption. Different neurocognitive profiles come with different assets and challenges. Assets being kind of those super strengths that we have, but also some challenges as well. So for example, some neurocognitive profiles may make neurodiverse people more vulnerable to harms, such as those associated with low impulse control or high impulsivity. So that's associated with substance use disorders, making risky financial decisions or other risky behaviours. Some neurocognitive profiles make relationships or connections more difficult, and that's at home, at work and at school. Some neurocognitive profiles can interact with shame to make us sensitive to rejection. And so feedback or slight criticism can feel like a knife to the heart. And this is something that if you're aware of it with your colleagues at work, when you're having difficult conversations, you can think about how to approach them. Neurodiversity also interacts with trauma to make the experience to trauma or the response to trauma in someone who is neurodiverse potentially more difficult because it exacerbates existing challenges with attention, memory and emotional regulation. So trauma, neurodiversity and shame influences how we behave, react and relate. But how does that happen? So experience interacts with the environment and our biology to form biological patterns of responding. So think of your nervous system like a protective and predictive machine. It works to keep us safe and it works to get our needs met, among lots of other important stuff like breathing and heartbeats and that kind of stuff. And when we're talking needs, we're talking food, shelter, warmth, but a lot of those needs that have come up today, safety, belonging, love, connection. If we grow up in a safe and secure environment and we have a secure and trusting relationship with our caregivers, they're attuned to us, they can help us, we can go to them for support, we feel seen, heard and understood. We learn that the world is safe. Our system develops in accordance with that environment. So cognitively in terms of our thought processes, emotionally, but biologically as well, develops in response to that environment that we grow up in. So people who grow up in these sort of safe, secure, trusting environments tend to be able to regulate their emotions quite well. They tend to have low impulsivity, less conflict in relationships, and can set healthy, respectful boundaries. The environment and the early relationships sends the system a message. I'm lovable, I'm safe, I'm worthy, and I matter. But in a harsh or challenging early environment, which is scary, which is threatening, which is unsafe, which is inconsistent with potentially neglectful caregivers, where there's no control over the environment, people learn that the world isn't safe and our system responds our system develops in response to that environment. We take more risks. We have more difficulty in regulating our emotions. We have higher impulsivity and we're more hypervigilant to threats. We're scanning for threats in our environment. The environment sends our system a message, and that is internalised, that I'm unsafe, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm bad, I'm defective, I don't matter. And you can see those challenging behaviours that you might see at home, at school, at work, in the community, they start to make sense. Sometimes your needs can be half met. So maybe food, warmth and shelter, got those, but consistently attuned and responsive, warm caregivers most of the time couldn't happen. My grown-ups look after me, but they don't understand me. They don't see me. Something about me is wrong. I'm bad. I'm defective. The people that I love will hurt my feelings, and I'll be alone. So we form these beliefs when we're little. Like, we don't get the context or the nuance or what was happening for our grown-ups at the time that meant that they couldn't attend to our needs the way that we wanted them to. In my case, my brother died. He was 9, and that happened a couple of weeks before I turned 1. So as you can imagine, but as a kid, you don't know that. You just make sense of your environment the best way that you can. As a kid, we have no control over our environment, and trauma and shame can ripple across generations. Trauma and shame can ripple across communities. They become embedded in families and community systems. So experiences shape our biology, and these patterns can echo through families and communities. We have a public health crisis on our hands. We need a public health response. So what can we as a community do? There's hope. If we become aware and spread awareness of the drivers and signs of behaviour, of trauma and shame, we can help encourage a different response. As a community, we can change our environment to have less escalation, more compassion, more understanding, more authentic connection, more opportunities for growth, help new patterns of behaving, relating, and reacting to be laid alongside those old patterns. Trauma and shame happens in relationships, but it's also healed in relationships. Thank you.